Welcome everyone. Bob, N6TV in San Jose, California, where it was about 110 degrees at the most at my house today. So I hope the power doesn't go out in the middle of this. So far, so good. You can write to me at n6tv@arrl.net anytime. So today we're going to show you mostly the same tips and tricks that I presented at Dayton, but there's two new ones at the end. So if all you guys that attended the Dayton talks you can take a break here or you can watch it again. First step is you really want to review the guides. You want to, the introduction to Elecraft K4 is a hard copy is shipped with every K4. Some K4s were shipped without it, but they shipped you a separate hard copy later. It's a little out of date because some of the screenshots are, or pre-production, but it's very good guide for various modes. There's an RTTY setup guide that I wrote that's in the Elecraft manuals page under application note. And there's of course, the built-in manual and the programmer's reference, which are on the Elecraft site. In the K4 user group site in the files area, which is that link right there to go direct to it, you'll find the new owner's checklist that I wrote that from messing up all your Windows sound settings and COM ports. It's very important to review that. It's only 3 pages and it's a step-by-step guide with links to more details. And then WT8P wrote a FT8 setup guide with screenshots for those interested in operating FT8 mode. The links in this PDF file, you can click on them once I post it, and you'll find that helpful. So tip number 1 today is the norm switch. The norm switch is, something doesn't sound right and it's too narrow or it's too wide or it's the IF shift is way off. You hold down that filter knob. That's a button. Holding it down, anything you see in yellow is a hold function, with the exception of those buttons on the right. You don't hold them down. But you definitely want to hold down that norm button. And anytime you switch bands, you might find the filters are all different because the K4 remembers filters and shift per band per VFO. So you swap VFOs, and all of a sudden all your filters are different. And 5.0 on AM and FM mode. And I forget what it does for RTTY. We can try it later. So second tip for today is using the speakers plus phones toggle. By default, the K4 is shipped with PF3 program to do this. You can program any PF key 1 through 4 on the right side of the K4 to do any toggle function in the menu just by holding that button down while they've programmed speakers plus phones. Let's see if my pointer works here. I should have highlighted that PF3. That'll set to no. You don't have to go into the menu to toggle it. Why do you want to do this? Well, you might be used to coming from other radios. You have to plug in the headphones to mute the speaker, and you have to unplug the headphones to unmute the speaker. That's kind of silly. That wears out the jack. You don't need to do that in a K3 or K4. Just press a function key, leave your headphones plugged in all the time, perhaps in the rear connector of the radio. So it's not well. They do. Thank you. All right. So the other button you can press is this thing that looks like a magnifying glass, which means search. And when you tap that button, you'll get a pop-up keyboard where you can type in the text you want to search for. Like, well, you just tap in the string IIR, and then you tap enter, and then it finds that entry, the first one, in the help text. You press the right arrow if you want to find the next entry. And here's another tip that most people don't know about, and that is, by the way, whenever you see this symbol with the big yellow arrow, that means you can rotate VFOA knob to do something, usually to scroll. Okay, maybe Scott's got a flaky internet connection there. We may have to edit some pieces together. Anyway, whenever you see this symbol down here, this guy right here, that means you can rotate VFOA knob to do something. There's also this last control button. So if you've just tapped something on the K4 and you don't know what you just did, it just changed everything, tap the question mark and then tap last control, and it'll scroll to the last thing that you changed in most cases. Even the menu in most cases. Sometimes not all of it works, but it's not going to hurt anything to tap that button. Tip number 4 is getting the scope edges right. I'm really picky about that. I don't want to see out of band stuff. I just want to see the whole phone band or the whole CW band or maybe a narrow portion of it. I don't want to see out of band stuff. And the easiest way I've found to make this work is a couple of steps. First, you always want to, I prefer fixed 2 mode, which means that instead of the cursor staying in the middle of the screen, the cursor moves and the band stays still so things don't smear. And when I get to an edge, it scrolls by half a page. So I get to some context about where I was. I don't lose things when I go to the edge, and I can demo that, what that looks like later. And then once you've set the span, which is the first thing to set, then you can use the RIT knob to actually set the edges where you want them. And you can tap A to B twice to make sure that pan A and pan B will look the same. If you tap the swap button, all of your edges may change because everything is saved when swapped when you tap the A/B button, not just the frequencies. Kind of wish the K4 had an option to program A/B for frequency toggle only, but we can do it with a K4 macro. And once you do that, you'll find that it's much easier. And finally, once you've got all the edges where you want them for that band and that mode, I'll show you later how you can store that in a quick memory and get it back instantly so you don't have to fiddle with it again. So here's it in visually what I was talking about. You tap display, and then this button over here that's highlighted that says fix 2. Every time you tap it, it changes to a different adapter mode. So people don't quite realize that. Same with the cursor A and B. You tap those and they go to A- and A to turn off a cursor, or A+ to mean the cursor is on. So when you tap that button, not hold it, because the yellow stuff is hold down here. That means this yellow, if you hold it down, it'll freeze the display. That's useful if you want to take a screenshot later or something. But if you just tap this button a few times, it'll toggle between fixed mode and slide 1 and slide 2. You can experiment with them. They're all documented in the help text. My preference is fixed 2. And then once you've got that set, you want to adjust the span. So tap span, usually that's highlighted by default when you power up the radio. You tap, and then you can change with, again, rotating the VFOA knob, because you see this symbol over here means, oh, wow, I can rotate the VFOA knob. So I would change it to the span that you're interested in. I think it goes up to 368, which would get you most of every phone band. In this case, I'm showing the entire SSB phone band from 21,200 in the US anyway to 21,450. And that's no point in seeing anything outside of that band if I'm operating phone, if I want to see the whole phone band. So that's, once you've set that, then how do we set the edges? Well, here's where it gets fun. There's a menu entry called RIT knob alternate function. By default, it's off. That's what the norm button will give you. This norm button down here means go back to the L-Craft default. If it's not white, it's not highlighted. It means you're not using norm. So again, you have to tap menu to get here, and then you scroll down with the VFOA knob, and then you tap this little button here, or you can click on it with a mouse if you've got a USB mouse connected to your K4. And that'll unlock the function, and then you can change this value with the up and down barrels here or with the mouse scroll wheel until it says pan center. Other options are, let's see, there's you could have span on the knob if you wanted to. You can have coarse tuning on the knob if you want it. But I found pan center to be the most useful because that means when the RIT is off, I can use the RIT knob to move the edges of the display where I want them. Then I can save them. So here we are. There's the RIT knob. I guess L-Craft couldn't decide whether it should be called RIT or OFS for offset, but they call it RIT knob in the menu and OFS on the radio label. And that's the knob. When those LEDs are off, when RIT and XIT are off, which is indicated by this being in gray up here, not white, meaning on, then when you scroll that knob, it will move the edges of the display. It keeps the width the same, but it moves the edges. So you set the edges to exactly the bottom of the band, and then you're set. So remember I said, once you get things set, you want to do it on both VFOs, and you want to save it in a quick memory. There's this thing called the per band quick memories in the K4 and the K3, and I'm not aware of any other radios that have this feature, at least not non-Elecraft radios. And it's really handy. So what you do is you tap the store button, which is that gray button at the top right corner of the radio, and then M1. Once you've got all your scope programmed the way you want it. And by the way, before you do that, don't forget to tap A to B button twice to copy that scope edge and setting to the B VFO. Then it'll save the edges, the frequency, the mode, the filters, the scope, most things, not the antenna, but the antenna is saved by band, not in the quick memories. But it saves all of the filters and especially the scope edges. And it's per band. So when you change bands, you get a whole new set of 4 quick memories to use. So just for convenience, I remembered things in the order these modes were created. So I use M1 for CW and M2 for sideband. RTTY was older than FT8, so I used M3 for the RTTY frequencies with a different span, and M4 for FT8 with a very narrow span. Tip number 6, antenna configuration. A lot of guys have confused by this, but it's really very simple. You just tell the radio what antennas you have connected, and you uncheck the rest. So to get to this dialog, when you first plug in the radio, you tap the ANT button, and you tap the TX button down here on the right, and then you press ANT config. And by default, you might have all selected. And this is telling you the antenna switch. What's it going to cycle through? That's what these check marks mean. So when I press the antenna switch, which is over here, I only have 2 antennas. I have my amplifier on antenna 1, and I have a dummy load on antenna 2. That's all I have. I don't have anything on antenna 3, so I never want that to be selectable by tapping the ANT switch. So just check those 2 boxes. Don't want to check all. That sets the TX antenna, which is indicated in the middle in orange here. So every time I tap ANT, it'll cycle just through those 2 antennas. Again, tap the TX button, tap antenna config, check the boxes. Now, what about naming those antennas? You might notice that in some of my antennas, I've labeled like antenna 2 as the dummy load. The only way you can name an antenna is with the antenna configuration dialog that comes up when you tap the RX ANT switch. You may find yourself tapping the RX switch and antenna switch, but no dialog comes up. And I will show you later how to get around that problem. But as the radio is shipped, the first time you tap RX ANT, this rather inconvenient dialog comes up. And it's only useful for renaming antennas. So what you do is you can rename your antennas first. And in order to change these labels, because they're in yellow, you hold them down. You don't hold down these buttons, even though they're in yellow. It's the only exception. But these you can hold down. And then when you hold that down, you'll get a pop-up dialog where you can enter what antenna name you want. I wanted to have a dummy load on my antenna 2 port. And so I go ahead and tap that in, tap enter. So then once you're done with that, you tap main RX antenna config, and you'll find display all is checked. That's default, and it's not a good default, but it's needed if you want to name antennas. This dialog is telling you what the RX ANT switch will do when you tap it. If this is checked, then it's going to display all your antennas in that dialog I showed here on the previous slide, which means I got to tap twice just to switch antennas. I don't want that. So after you've named your antennas, go ahead and check use subset. And then just check the antennas that you have available for receiving. There's no need to check antenna 1 if antenna 1 is always your TX antenna, or if you just want whatever my TX antenna is to be an option for reception, which is most of the time. If you happen to check antenna 1, then every time you press this RX antenna switch, it's going to cycle from antenna 1 to RX1 to RX2, back to your transmit antenna, which is probably antenna 1 again. You're going to press RXN again, and nothing's going to change because it's going to cycle back to antenna 1. So you'll get duplicates in the list. You don't want any duplicates. So there's no need to check antenna 1, antenna 2, antenna 3 for reception if you have only a TX antenna. And in this case, I have 2 receive antennas, 2 loops. But if you just have nothing on the receive antenna, don't check those boxes. Once you've done it for the main RX, you have to remember to do it for the sub RX as well. You tap sub RX because it has a totally different antenna configuration and antenna config. And you'll see whenever you tap sub RX, this B set symbol appears. If you see B set up here, it means what you're doing. It means either you've tapped the B set knob or you've tapped the sub RX knob, and anything you do is going to affect the VFOBs. It even highlights when you tap that. Again, I want the identical antenna choices on my sub receiver, and you need to do that on both to really make things in sync. And it's telling you here, that's what the sub antenna switch is going to do. So it means every time I tap the sub antenna switch, which is a hold of the RX antenna switch, it's going to cycle through these 3 choices. This one here is really useful if you happen to want, let's say you have 2 transmit capable antennas, like 2 cross dipoles or something, and they're on antenna 1 and antenna 2 because you can transmit on them. You don't have anything there. Well, we wish that equal opposite TX antenna was a choice you can select, and it's available whenever the TX antennas have just 2 choices. Unfortunately, it's not implemented yet. Really should be grayed out. But there's a way around that because I've posted macros that will simulate that configuration. But as of today, in R30B4, or R30 they call it now, this equal opposite antenna is not implemented. I don't even think you can check it. I don't think it works. But someday it will be, and that'll be really useful for the guys who have an antenna and antenna 2, antenna 1, and they're both transmit capable, and you want to use diversity or have the other antenna being used for reception as an option. So once you've programmed those as I showed, every time you tap RXN, it's going to just cycle through antennas. It's not going to bring up a dialog anymore. Or if you hold it down, it's going to change the subreceiver antenna. But what if I want to rename my antennas again? I spelled Yagi wrong or something like that. Well, the only way to get back to the antenna renaming dialog is to tap main RX antenna config and go back to display all. Then you dismiss that dialog, and then when you tap the RX antenna button, it'll bring up your antenna renaming dialog as I showed before. Here's what I'm trying to say. You tap main RX, main RX, and then antenna config. And then if you go back and check display all, then when you tap the RXN button, you'll get back to the renaming dialog that lets you name the antennas. So where are the antennas shown? Well, there's 3 places. The left-hand side is, and you don't have to have dual dual pan adapter up like I'm showing here. The top of this screen, even if you have a single pan adapter, this label in white shows you what antenna is being used by the main receiver. This shows you what antenna is being used for transmit. It's always in orange in the middle. And this end over here shows you what antenna is being used for receive in the subreceiver. And then including diversity mode. If you have the diversity mode antenna, in this case, it also shows you that you've got I've got the preamp 2 shown on the subreceiver. It's not shown on the main receiver. That'd be over here if I had preamp on the main receiver. So these labels at the top, pay close attention to them while you're pushing buttons. It shows you exactly what antenna is being used for transmit in the middle, for receive of the main on the left, and for receive of the sub on the right. So number 8 tip, and this is a little bit too hard to explain with one slide, so I may have to go and do the live demo to explain it. But if you want to change something and you want your main monitor and external monitor to be different, or you want something to be different between pan A and B, then you have to check the boxes, these little buttons up here, to indicate what you want to change. In this case, since I've highlighted this little ampersand here, which lights up all the buttons, then what's going to happen is it's going to change whatever I tap down here, not all things, some things. For example, if I want the spans to be identical between the two, between both receivers and the same on both external and displays, I tap and highlight those buttons, then I adjust the span and I'll get a 60 kilohertz span as I'm showing here on both displays. But what if I want like a 20 kilohertz span on A and a 100 kilohertz span on B? Then I would uncheck this ampersand and just tap the one I want to change. And what if I just want the LCD to have pan A and the EXT to have pan B? Well, then I tap LCD, tap this button to change it to A, tap EXT so only it's highlighted, tap this button again until it says pan equal B, and then I've got pan B on the external and pan A on the main. So there's two different things you can change. You can have the pan adapters, A and B, and you can have the LCD or external monitor if you have an external HDMI monitor plugged in. And that assumes, of course, you're not in mirror mode where both the LCD and the external monitor show the same thing. So tip number 9 for CW ops like me, I really am not happy with the default pitch that Elecraft ships the K4 with. 600 hertz is very high, and the pitch control also controls the center frequency of the IF it tracks. By the way, it's labeled PTCH now on the radio. That's an old screenshot there that said PTC. Now, a lot of guys get confused when they see these button labels. The thing in white is what you're looking at, not pitch, but word per minute. If I want to see what the pitch is, I have to tap that button or click on it with the mouse, and then it'll display what the pitch value is. The default is 0.60, which means 600 hertz. My preference is to use 500 or 450. You can use any value to the nearest tenth of hertz for a side tone pitch. But it turns out that the IF shifts in 50 kilohertz steps, 50 hertz steps, not 10 hertz steps like the side tone. So you'll find it's a step function. If you listen carefully to the IF as you adjust the pitch, you'll hear it shift. And you'll find, at least for me on CW, I'm not fond of really high-pitched screeching noises, so I like to get the pitch down low. It also makes it easier for the ear to distinguish two nearby signals if they're both lower in pitch than higher in pitch, because percentage-wise they're different. And the other tip for operating CW is if you're going to use paddles connected to the K4, which is very convenient because it supports both Curtis A and Curtis B timing. I recommend changing the weight control from the factory default, which I think is 1.10, which frankly is keying much too heavy, especially at high speeds. As of R30, you can change it to 1.0 and get nearly perfect timing of your CW output. I'm kind of a perfectionist about CW timing. But if you have R28 or R29, you should change it to 0.90 to get closer to perfect CW timing. For those of you who are using software like N1MM or WriteLog or WinTest or DXLog.net or FLDigi to key CW by the convenient DTR pins, the virtual DTR pins that are provided in the K4 serial ports, it's very important, and this is covered in the new owner's setup checklist, to prevent your PC from keying your radio 4 or 5 times every time you connect the USB cable or happen to reboot your PC. If ever you hear on the air, you turn on something and your radio gets keyed like this and it sounds like dot, 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 dot. That's because they forgot to change these FTDI default options. What are these doing? They're looking for a serial mouse on the K4 USB port. They're also looking for a modem. And so they're sending a bunch of garbage out on the DTR and RTS pins, and if you have those options enabled in the menu, your radio is going to key. You don't want that to happen. So you have to change those options for both serial ports in the K4, so it looks like this. You want to uncheck serial enumerator. You don't want Windows looking for a serial mouse. And you want to check this box, disable modem control at startup. And then your radio won't key, maybe once for a tiny second when you reboot or power it up, but it should not key after that. If you're using the RS-232 connector and a real legacy RS-232 port, there's another way to disable the serial enumerator that's covered in my other talk linked from my qrz.com page about disabling serial enumeration on legacy serial ports. But here's what I was talking about. These menus I find really neat. You don't need a Win keyer or an external keyer to key a K4. You can get very good timing out of most logging software on modern PCs just by using the DTR and RTS options that the K4 provided. And that's on all 3 serial ports, both the 2 virtual serial ports and the legacy 9-pin serial port on the back of the K4. Here's how you enable it. You simply set DTR to CW and RTS to PTT. You can just set RTS to off if you prefer to use QSK keying, and then there's no PTT signal to override. I really find that convenient. One cable to the PC, and I get sound card, CW keying, push to talk for FT8. And the nice thing about the K4, unlike the K3, is it gives you two completely independent serial ports. They're labeled here USB PC1 and USB PC2. They might come up as COM5 and COM6 when you first install the USB cable. You can use COM5 for N1MM or your logging software, and you can use COM6 for WSJT and or MMTTY FSK RIDI keying. It's the first rig that Elecraft's produced that supports FSK RIDI on a DTR pin. And there's no conflicts because they're two independent serial ports. You can even run two different logging programs or three different ones, one on each serial port. Plus you've got the Ethernet port that some programs like N1MM can use for rig control, but you can't key CW and or FSK RIDI on the DTR. There's no DTR pin on the Ethernet port, of course. So here's what you do in N1MM contest software. Other software is similar. Oops, I've got K3 listed here, but they've got Elecraft K4 available now. And you have to check the CW other box, click the set button, and then you tell it I want to do CW keying on DTR and push to talk on the RTS pin of the K4 rig control port. You can set a delay here if you have a slow amplifier, you want the lead to go. I do not recommend checking any of these software PTT buttons. It's not necessary. It's more work for, it's more work for the radio or for all the software to figure out commands to do push to talk. Very simple for it to, it's just hardware that toggles the pin. That's the best way and fastest way to do CW. And the timing will be fine if you follow the guidelines I have in my other talk about everything you need to know about USB and serial ports, including setting your CPU speed to maximum performance. You'll have good time. So this is brand new for those guys who slept through the first 10 chips in the talk because they were at the Dayton talk and saw all this before. This is new today. I hope I got these slides right. I was just preparing them at the last minute here. So tip number 11 for today is how to use Elecraft K4 macros to make your radio do things that the buttons don't do by themselves. For example, there's this button called the remote antenna button, which you get to by holding down the ANT button. Normally it does nothing. Maybe someday it'll have a switch for controlling a remote antenna switch. But for right now, it's like a fifth function key that's on the radio. You've got PF1 through 4, but they kind of double up with functions like BSET and clear, RAT and XIT. But chances are if you only have ANT1 enabled, then accidentally tapping ANT's not going to do anything. You hold it down, it could do something fun. So I like to do it to program it to use the auto adjustment of the reference level, because sometimes the scope gets too bright or too dark, and I just want it to recalculate the reference level automatically right now and clear up the display. So how do we do that? Well, the first step is you tap function and then hold down this button here. It's in yellow, so you hold it down and you get to macros. Don't be intimidated by the word macro. If you're not a programmer and you have no idea what that word means, you don't need to know. Just think of it as Elecraft commands that you can basically control anything on the radio by sending it a command. You can do it over a serial port. You can test it over an Ethernet telnet connection to port 9200 on the K4, or you can just test it inside the radio itself. So the first step is you tap function and hold down macros. When you do that, a pop-up window will come up. And again, you use the VFOA knob to scroll down to the list of macros that you want to program. And right after all the function keys 1 through 8 are listed, which are the on-screen function keys, which aren't especially convenient because you got to tap twice to get to them. You scroll down until remote antenna switch is highlighted. And I recommend entering a label, even though it's optional and you don't need to do it to make things work. I like to put in a label so I can remind myself what this command does without having to look it up in the manual. So that's, you tap on this middle column here. A lot of people make the mistake when they're first trying to program a macro, they see unused there and they tap right there, and they end up trying to put the command in the label column. But that's, the middle column is the label, the right-hand side column is the command. So first I like to get the label right, so I tap that or click on it with a USB mouse. Pop-up screen comes up. Type in the string you want to enter for the label. You need to make it shorter than this if you want to see it on a function button label. It doesn't really display anywhere except this screen when you're doing a button, like a hard switch, like the remote switch. And then you tap enter to save. If you tap that X at the top, it's going to close the window without saving anything. Well, by the way, this is your backspace key right here. Some people think this is the backspace, but it's this one down here. And this one moves the cursors left and right. And of course, this one shifts the keys. In my opinion, this keyboard could use a lot of improvement because the symbols you need, like the semicolon and the slash and backslash and all that stuff are, you know, all lowercase dialogue, and things like $sign you need to change the sub receiver commands are, you have to shift to get to them. So I really wish they'd make this a little more K4 user friendly. Anyway, once you've set the label, then you tap the last column, which is where you enter the command. And this is the magic command to automatically recalculate, I can think of it that way, or auto ref 1. And the 1 means do it now, just recalculate my reference level. This is a feature the K4 has that the P3 doesn't. It'll automatically adjust the reference level based on the band noise under current conditions. So you don't have to constantly fiddle with the reference level knob to get to trim the grass, as it were, of the scope. So you can see the sensitive weak signals and not get overwhelmed with a bunch of static in the waterfall display. So you tap that portion of the window. You pop-up dialog tells you what you're programming, in this case, the remote antenna switch. Tap in the string. Don't forget the trailing semicolon. And you can tap more than one command in sequence here. Don't use any blanks. Don't use any commas. Use a semicolon. The commands that start with a $sign affect the display. The other commands are more direct and just affect the radio itself. And then you tap enter to save it. And you're done. And I'll give you a demo of how that works in a minute here. Some other useful macros that I found really convenient that I use all the time. The one I probably use more than anything these days is this macro right here. I found it inconvenient to reach up to the radio to turn on the audio peaking filter. The audio peaking filter on the K4 really helps pull out a weak signal, especially on CW, that is, if you set the bandwidth to 50 hertz. The default is 30 hertz, which I find pretty unusable. But at 50 hertz, it helps a lot. And by the way, you have to set that 50 hertz APF bandwidth on every band on both VFOs. It's not a global setting. It's per band, per VFO, unfortunately. But once you've set it to 50 hertz, and there is a command to do that I haven't shown here, this command toggles the auto peaking filter on the main receiver, and when you see the $sign, it toggles the auto peaking filter on the sub receiver. So I want to toggle both on and off at the same time. The slash means toggle it on or off. This command is not documented in the latest guide that I've seen, which hasn't been updated since March, I think. But commands with a / means toggle. Like this one toggles just the sub receiver on and off, which I also find convenient because I don't want to bump the VFO knob, and that sub button is kind of close to the VFO knob. And I'm always capturing screenshots to make presentations like this. And I wish everybody who posted a trouble report on the groups.io would also post a screenshot if it's related to that. You just stick a USB drive into the front panel USB connector, and then tap. In this case, I've got it where I hold down the second K-pod switch. This SS0 command just captures the LCD screen. If for any reason I want to capture the external monitor, I can use the SS1 command. You can also tap function screen cap, but you can't always get to that facility because it's covered up by something else that you're trying to show. And it also captures both main and main LCD and the external monitor at the same time, and it's slower. And usually I just want to capture the LCD. So I find the SS0 command screenshot LCD to be really convenient. Put it on a K-pod switch if you have one, or you could put it on the REM remote antenna button or a PF key if you like. All right, I think this is the last tip of the day, and then we can go to the questions and the live demo. A lot of folks have a linear amplifier connected to the K4. Often it's a solid state amplifier that needs a different drive level on every band. Just like the K3, the K4 has a menu setting that's off by default. It's called per band power. and you hit the unlock button and change that to yes, and then the K4 will remember the drive level that you last set on every single band. And if you've hooked a KPA 500 or KPA 1500 to the K4 ACC connector with an ACC cable or by Y box and a standard cable, then you should see a message on the display every time you turn the amp on or off. It should say KPA 1500 on, KPA 1500 operate, KPA 1500 standby. When it goes to standby, the K4 will remember the drive power you want in standby mode, maybe 100 watts. When it goes to operate, the power will automatically switch to the last power you had set on that band when the amp was detected to be in operate mode, which would be on the order of 50 watts or less, depending on the band. If you have a non-Elecraft solid state amplifier, you'll only get one power setting, but it will be remembered per band. Very, very convenient feature that not aware of too many other rigs, if any, that have this feature. It's especially nice when you've got the 500 and 1500. Extra tip, if you have a KPA 1500 that you've been using with a K3 and you just upgraded to a K4, be sure to change the menu in the KPA 1500, the radio type menu. Change it from K3 radio type to K4 radio type. If you don't see radio type K4 listed, it means your KPA 1500 firmware needs an update. There is an update that added K4 to the list. Once you do that, the Elecraft will properly remember to display KPA 1500 on, not KPA 500 on. Now you've changed that to yes, and you'll be all set. So here's a summary of all the tips that I presented today. The norm switch to get the passband to sound right after you switch something and it doesn't sound right. Using the speakers plus phones toggle to turn the speaker on and off so you don't have to, keep plugging and unplugging a headphone jack. Using the search facility of the built-in manual. When you're adjusting the scope, do the span first to figure out how much of the band you want to see, and then use the RIT knob to set the edges, and then use the quick memories to save that setting. And it also saves the VFO frequencies. Using the antenna config for the transmit antenna to just select the antennas you have connected, and setting both the antenna config of the main receiver and the sub receiver to indicate what receive antennas you want available to both. Using the display menu to set the pan adapter properties for pan adapter A, pan adapter B, or the LCD and external monitor. For CW guys, adjusting the pitch control to a more pleasant listening audio passband, and the weight control to get the timing right if you're using the internal keyer or KY commands, or CW memories, which I didn't cover today. And of course, when you plug in the USB cable, you really should fix the FTDI properties if you have any intent in the future of enabling those DTR and RTS keying options, which I find highly convenient. How to use the K4 macros to quickly switch things or change things that the radio doesn't do automatically. I think I forgot to talk about the diversity toggle, so I should probably cycle back to that slide. And for linear amplifiers, you always want to set the per band power menu setting to yes. Let me go back to that slide. Yeah. Up here, diversity toggle. Why is it a backslash instead of a forward slash? Was a subtle difference. The diversity toggle with the backslash is probably the one you want to use most of all, because you may have discovered that if you turn on diversity by holding down the button, and then you hold down the button again thinking that will turn off diversity. Well, it does, but it keeps the subreceiver on, and all of a sudden your ears are listening to two different frequencies. But the diversity backslash toggle will automatically remember the state that you had prior to enabling diversity, like maybe subreceiver was off. And every time you tap it, it'll turn diversity on, and then you tap it again, and it'll turn both the subreceiver and diversity off in one command. Or if you had the subreceiver on when you started, it'll remember that and turn the subreceiver back on. So it's a very convenient command. All right. This presentation, at least the old version, is already on the tips and tricks section of my QRZ.com bio page. But I'll be adding this version pretty soon, this update. And now it's time to see if I can get a live demo to work. And if there's any how do I questions that you guys might have, you can unmute yourself and ask, or anything else you'd like to see demonstrated. But first, let's see if I can get this to work. You guys should be seeing a picture of my live K4D, and I'll turn on the audio.
We see it, Bob. It looks good. I'm not hearing your audio.
I think I forgot to turn on share audio. So let me go back to that. Okay, how about now?
We hear audio.
Oh, good.
It was one of those multi-band verticals. Supposedly you can get.
So one of the things I didn't cover was this little icon in the lower right corner. I have a USB mouse connected to my K4. So if I want to move VFO A, then I move the mouse and left click on a signal. And that moves VFO A, and the little icon stays with that letter A up there, which means that this mouse wheel is going to move VFO A. And as I slowly move the mouse wheel up and down, I'm fine tuning at the current step rate, which I have set to 10 hertz, 100 hertz steps on phone, because most guys in non-contest mode are on an even frequency. But if I right click like on this signal, that's going to move VFO B, and notice that the logo changed to a B. That's telling you that the mouse wheel is now going to fine tune VFO B, the last thing I clicked on. And if I happen to click over here and turn the RIT on or off, now you see it changes to a letter R in white, indicating that I'm now going to shift the RIT, and you can see the RIT moving up and down. And I don't know why I have XIT on. You can right click in this box and turn XIT off. Right click turns it on and off, and left click turns RIT on and off and clears it when you turn it on for the first time. So now I've got RIT control, but I want VFO A back, and I don't want to move VFO A. How do I do it? Well, you put the mouse pointer right over that little logo, and you click it with the left mouse button, and it changes to an A. Click it with the right mouse button, it changes to a B, back to A again. And now I've back to the mouse wheel fine-tuning A without moving my VFO A frequency. And the same thing applies if you have dual pan adapter mode. I do have a menu setting set for that. The default is different. This mouse left right button QSY, by default they wanted to make touch screens move VFO B if you touch pan adapter B, and touching is the same as left click. So the default is not left and right. The default is, if I hit the norm, it shows me the default left only, which means whatever I tap on is going to be like a left mouse click. And so right clicking isn't going to do what I want on the, but I like to change it to the other setting, which is left is A and right is B, and then dismiss the dialog. Oh, what happened to all the signals? Oh, I switched to the dummy load somehow. All right. So I think I must have clicked on the antenna here by mistake. Yeah, that switched the antenna. You can click on antenna there. And of course, you guys know you can click on the S meter to see the mini pan. Well, what if I want to see the S meter and the mini pan? Well, how do I do that? Not too hard. You hold down in this case, let me switch my subreceiver antenna so it's the same as the main. And now if I hold down the diversity button, I've just turned on diversity mode, so VFOB doesn't matter anymore. And now I am actually got identical S meter. Why? Because both receivers don't have the same antenna. Everything's set to antenna 1. Now I could turn on the mini pan. Now I have mini pan and S meter all the same. I'll turn on the audio here. Oop. I'm looking at the wrong screen, wrong button. Got 2 mouse buttons to turn here.
That's okay. I'm thinking about it. Space things out a little bit, I think. Go ahead. Well,
so as you can see, I'm hearing both receivers in both ears. I turn diversity off.
I've got some trees
Now you'll just hear it in the left ear, and I'm hearing a totally different frequency adjusted by VFOB in the right ear. I don't know if stereo is coming through for you guys. You tell me.
Yes,
Were
it
you hearing,
is.
you were hearing the stereo in both ears. Okay, good. All right, it's really time for Q&A. I can demo anything you'd like to see. We've got another 15 minutes or so. Unmute yourself if you can. Are people allowed to unmute? Oh, I see some things in the chat I
Yes.
didn't look at. Let's see what the chat says.
Yes, you can unmute now and ask any questions.
Can you step through using the per band power with a KPA 500? Not exactly sure if I can use two separate settings, one barefoot and another for KPI 500 engaged. Yes, you can. Let's see, that was the second question though. No, that was you. Okay. Paul, thanks for the question. Yes, I have a KPA 1500 here connected. As you can see here on 20 meters, I don't have it powered up at this point, but I will in a sec. Let me change the power to 100 watts. You see me turning the knob. I'm turning the power knob, and you see the power change to 100 watts here. If I turn on my KPA 1500, which is connected by ACC cable, and I wait a second, it tells me KPA 1500 is on, but it's in standby. So the power is staying to stay at 100 watts. Now, if I put the KPA 1500 into operate mode, notice the power changed to 50 watts. It did that because that was the last drive power I used when I was on 20 meters. K4 remembers it when you shut it down, and it's different on every band. So let me turn the power. Let's say I go down to 40 watts, and then I turn the KPA 1500 back into standby mode. When you see that message, it means that that's been detected, and you see the power went back to 100 watts. And if I put it back in operate mode, the power switched automatically to 40 watts because that's all the drive that's needed when I have the KPA 1500 in operate mode. The same thing works exactly the same way with the KPA 500. Assuming you've set radio type in the KPA 500 to K3, there is no K4 option or firmware update to the KPA 500 that I'm aware of. But it will do the exact same thing. And let me change bands here. If I go to 15, then it changed the power to 10 watts because I rarely use this rig on 15 with the amplifier. If I put it back in standby, then the power goes to 100 watts. So you can see there's a different drive power on each band. Unlike the K3, which I think had just one barefoot setting, let me try something. I'm going to change it to 90 watts here on 15 meters. I'm going to go back to 20, amps in standby, so it's still at 100 watts. And if I go to operate, it goes to 40. And if I go to standby, it goes to 100. And if I go back to 15 meters, then I'm back at 90. So it's remembering the power in barefoot mode and in amplifier in operate mode on both bands. 10 watts isn't right, so I'll put that up to about 40 or so as a starting point. Go ahead.
I had a question about the power required for the 1500, if I may.
Yeah.
I see you're using powers of 40 watts. I know every 1500 will have a little bit different gain, but typically I can't use more than about 25 to tops 30 watts, and I get full power.
Well, every KPA 1500 is different. Mine are pretty original serial numbers. I think I've got serial number 16 and serial number 156, I think, or something. They're pretty low.
Pretty significant difference in gain between yours and mine then.
Well, every band is different. On some bands,
I understand that.
only need 30 or 40 watts. On 20 and 15 for this amplifier, I seem to need more than 40 or 50 watts to get 1500 out.
Yeah. You've got considerably less gain than mine then.
I envy you. I envy you.
Yeah.
Let's see. I could go back to a band with signals on it. Let me demonstrate the audio peaking filter. Remember I talked about, oh, I forgot to mention something since we had the amplifier on. Folks don't realize that when you have an Elecraft amplifier connected to a K3 or K4, there's a bunch of band buttons on the amplifier. How many? Count them up. 12 band buttons plus an aux button, or 11 band buttons on the amplifier, and you can press those buttons to instantly switch to any band you want. You don't have to double tap the band button like I do here and then tap a band. You don't need to do that on the K4. You can, once you have your amplifier on, and I have it in standby mode now, I can just tap the switch button on the amplifier to go 15 direct. If I want to go to 20, I just tap the button on the amplifier and it goes direct. That only works if you have the radio type in the amplifier menu set to L-Craft K3 or K4. It doesn't work if you have the amplifier set to BCD or something, or serial, or one of those other options. So let me go to CW. Remember I told you, I see how my band edges are set for the whole phone band? I'm going to tap the recall switch, which don't confuse it with the REC switch, which is record. Recall switch is the gray one at the upper right corner of the rig. I actually want to share that screenshot. See if that works. So you should see a picture of the K4 on your screen. Right here,
We do.
circled in, thanks, is the recall switch. Don't confuse it with the record switch. They are different. Record M1 is memories, voice or CW or RIDI. The recall switch is the one that recalls the quick memories. So you tap recall, and then I'm going to tap M1, which is my CW frequency. Minimize this. Go back to here. Let's see. Are you seeing the still seeing the K4 display? Maybe not. Let me go
Yes,
back.
yes, we are.
You're still seeing it? Okay. So if I go recall M1, I can ignore I have the beacon frequencies all programmed here. I could tap recall on the screen here, but I want to use a quick memory. So once that display comes up, I press M1. I ignore the pop-up. And look what it did. It changed me to the bottom 60 hertz.
Yeah, we're not
60
seeing it.
kilohertz
We're not seeing your K4, Bob.
Oh, you're not seeing the
we're only
K4.
seeing the.
We're seeing the K4 diagram, not your K4.
How about now?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so where I was up here on the phone band. I just did recall M2. Thanks for that. Yeah, I thought I wasn't sharing the right screen. So, so if I hit recall M1, watch what happens to the band edges. This dialog comes up with all the various beacon frequencies that I programmed in, but I'm going to ignore that. I don't tap any of those. I just tap the M1 button. That's the quick memory for this band, 20 meters. Then it went down to CW. And let's see if I can turn on audio and find a weak signal for you guys. I've got my subreceiver on, so I'll turn that off. Don't see too many weak signals. Maybe here's one way down here. I'm holding down the norm switch, and seems narrow to me. So that guy's pretty weak, but I'm gonna tap my APF switch, and maybe it'll bring him a little out of the noise. I'm not quite centered. Oh, I've got my pitch set wrong. No, I don't. I got it right. Well, so much for that demo. Turn APF off. That's better. There's a nice bug. I should probably turn my beam to figure out who that is. Well, here's a station that's a little weaker. So you should be hearing the effect of the APF going on and off. As you see APF appear. Is it off? And there it's on. I just got an email from L-Craft developer K6KR, not N6KR, who reminded me that setting radio type, let me mute myself, setting radio type to K4 has two functions. It displays the appropriate message KPA 500 versus KPA 1500. It also changes the frequency resolution when it uses the tuner to set the frequency of the tuner automatically, the last memory of the tuner, the amplifier tuner. The K3 has an 8 kilohertz resolution for frequency, and the K4 has a 1 kilohertz resolution. So the tuner can do a little better job going to the right segment. So remember I talked about programming the remote antenna button if I hold down that button now, watch carefully what happens to the waterfall. There wasn't too big a change. There was a line that go across because it was pretty much set right. Let me just change bands to a noisier band and see what I can do, or if I can get a better demo of that. Okay, so this band looks pretty noisy. I'm getting nothing but white in my display. Well, it auto-calculated, there's a static crash or something. Now it's too dark. I'm going to hold down the remote antenna button, and it recalculated, and it set the display where I wanted it, which was weak signals show up as faint lines. A lot of folks I've seen, they tap display and they mess up the scale setting. You hold down the scale button like I'm doing here, and that's how many dB you see above the lines, basically. So if I've got it set too low, then I get a really messed up display. I can't see anything useful in the waterfall, even if I hold down the remote antenna button. It's not going to do much useful. So don't set the scale so low. Set the scale up to about 80 dB of signals. In most cases, at least in this part of the country, that seems to work out right. It tops out the meter at around S9 plus 10. Of course, it depends on the band noise. All right, folks, this is the time to ask any questions. Go ahead and, oh, I see a new chat. Thanks for doing that. If you guys are having trouble, unmute yourself.
Hey, Bob, this is Ned. I've had trouble figuring out how to get the split to work correctly. Every time I try to use split, I have to stop and get the mode set right on the split setup. It seems to never be what I expected it to be. Is there some, I thought in the K3 it would inherit whatever mode you were in you know, on the radio. It would know, you know, you wouldn't need to train it to be in the right mode yeah, I guess it's on the second VFO. Yeah, so
Okay.
somehow mine.
I'll explain. Okay, so I think I understand what problem is. You probably have the sub VFO set like this. See, the sub VFO is in LSB mode and the main's in CW. So you're right. If I turn on split, then the sub remains on LSB. I don't want that. So you have a good point there. So let me get out of T. Let me turn off the amplifier because it's making a lot of heat. If I let's see if it's any different. I'm out of test mode. If I turn on split, yeah, you don't want that. What good is having LSB on there? Notice, by the way, the filter is all out of whack. Okay. So what I do before turning on split is I tap the A to B button twice. If I just tap it once, it's just going to change the frequency, not the mode. Just like the K3, if you tap it twice, it copies all the settings from A to B, and it puts the frequency the same. And now when I turn on split, it will work. But I have another tip for you, and that is you never have to use split, especially if you're trying to work a DX pilot. Here's how I would recommend doing it. I would go ahead and tap the A to B button like I just did. I tune in the DX first, tap the A to B button, and all I do is I turn on the sub. And now let me pretend that there was DX there. So let me tune in somebody and turn on the audio here. So let me pretend that this guy is working split and he's listening up. Okay. I equalize both by tapping A to B twice. I turn on the sub, and then I move my VFO A. I leave the DX in the right ear, because now my VFO A knob is my transmit, just like it normally is. I don't have to worry about split or not. I've kept the DX in my right ear, which you guys should be hearing, and I can use the gain controls. I can't do it on line out here, but I could have the DX be really loud in my right ear, and I can tune the pile up weak with the left knob and find an empty spot in the pile up or the last caller in the left ear without ever having to turn split on. Once I find the frequency I want to call, I just call. I don't have to have split on because I'm listening to the DX in the right ear. Just like normal simplex operating, my VFO A is always my transmit frequency. Turn off the sub when I don't want to hear the DX anymore, and I'm done. So that's my tip is split is problematic. I find it much easier to use the sub receiver if the antenna is in preamp and stuff, or the sub receiver are set right. And that's something else that's copied, by the way. Let's say I had the preamp on If I tap A to B twice, notice that it copies the preamp to the sub as well.
Okay, I missed that second tap. Was that in the manual? I don't remember seeing that.
Well, let's find out. I'm going to hit the question mark key and I'm going to hit last control and it says VFO A and B display. So that didn't help much. So, but I think there's a next hit. Nope, there isn't. So let me do a search for A. Let's see if we can find it with a greater than sign. Oh, there's a greater than sign. B, and it might have no spaces. So this search may not work. Try again. All right, live demo time. A to B, because it's a picture, it's probably, there it is. A to B copies the A to B. A second tap of A to B within 2 seconds copies all settings. So it is
Okay.
documented.
The K3 did that too.
Bob, we have a couple of questions in the
Yeah,
chat. If you
K3
could look
did
at
that.
them, please.
Thank you. I see 2. Okay. Can the 2 serial ports on the rear USB connection be used without CW, FSK, and N1MM without reprogramming? Huh? Well, you got me there. You can use the 2 serial ports on the rear USB connection be used for CW, FSK, and N1MM without reprogramming. By reprogram, you're going to have to clarify what you mean there, John. I'm not sure what you mean by reprogramming. If you want to do CW and FSK, oh, I think I know what you're saying now. What about CW, FSK, and N1MM? All right, here's how I've got mine set up for that. By the way, does having this chat on top of the window put a big blank box in the display, or do you see the whole display?
I just see the whole display. I don't see the chat box.
Okay, good. So if I go to the menu and I go to serial section, the serial stuff, that's the RS-232 is the legacy 9-pin port. I can do DTR RTS keying on that. If I have a legacy serial port, it's the best one to use if there's one on my PC. But here, as you'll notice, I've got CW and push to talk set for USB PC1. And unlike the K3 or ICOM radios, I can set this. I have set my PC2, my second virtual serial port, for FSK and PTT. You see that on the screen there? So I've now got COM1 used with M1MM for CW and push to talk. And I've got COM2, if you will, or COM5 and COM6, whatever they're labeled, assigned to MMTTY for FSK RIDI keying. So I don't have to switch any COM ports around to go between CW keying and N1M and MMTTY keying. And N1MM setup is complicated for RIDI, but it will key with EXT FSK. It's covered in my everything you need to know about USB serial ports talk, linked on my QRZ.com page about how to set up MMTTY. It's also in the MMTTY setup guide on the Elecraft page, the application note I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. All right, K4 and K3 using ACC cable for KPA 500 from Jeff, WA8 SAJ. I think you're asking, can I connect both a K3 and a K4 in parallel to a KPA 500 at the same time, like using a Y cable or an accessory or my Y box? I haven't tested that. It would not work if both rigs were on. It may work if one of the rigs is off. But of course, you also have to worry about getting the RF output from the rigs to the one and only RF input of the KPA 500. It doesn't have 2 RF inputs. So you'll have to switch the RF input. I think it will work, but it may not, because when one rig is off, it may drain too much voltage out of those ACC pins for keying the radio. So you might find that the amplifier is keyed even when there's no keying. Looks like I answered John's question. So I haven't tried it. I wouldn't recommend it. There is another way around it, which is to use a 15 position AB switch. They don't make 3-row 15-pin switches. The VGA type connectors switch VGA monitors and ground too many pins, so that won't work. But they do make 2-row 15-pin D sub switches or DA15 connectors that switch all 15 pins independently. And I have in stock a cable that maps 15-pin 2-row to 15-pin 3-row. So it's kind of an expensive solution, but I would recommend a switch rather than trying to wire in parallel a K3 and K4 to a KPA 500 at the same time. Okay, W2PAR, is there a way to get the KPA 500 to accurately report its output power to my logging program? Well, that's not really a K4 question. Currently, it reports only the K4 setting value, and I have to manually update my log entries in the program. Not sure, Paul, which program you're using, but it would have to send commands to the KPA 500 serial port to figure out what power the KPA 500 is using. And of course, that changes every second of transmission. On FT8, it'd be pretty steady. On CW, it would probably be a mess to try to read the power setting from the KPI 500. But if you look in the KPI 500 programming reference, there is probably a command that will get you the current power meter reading. But you can't send any commands to the K4 to get the KPI 500 power reading.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bob, we have a couple of questions from NY9H Bill Steffi.
Yeah, I was just scrolling to that. Hello, Bill. DVR memory playback versus quick memory recall. Okay, oops. Well, yeah. Let's get the picture of the K4 back up, if I can. I think I need to share that. New share. Now I'm sharing both. Okay. So you should see the picture of the K4, the whole thing now, right?
Right.
Not the live display. All right. So this, if you want to recall a quick memory, you press this recall button that I've circled in red, and then you press the quick memory button M1 to 4. If you want to play a message that you've already programmed, you just tap the message key, M1 to M4. You don't tap recall. You just tap the message key and it plays the voice message if you're in phone, or it plays the CW message if you're in CW. How to record a CW message? You would tap record, and then you tap the key you want to record. And a pop-up keyboard comes up and you program the CW messages. I can show you that if you like on screen. How do you program a phone message? Do the same thing. You tap record and M1, and then a pop-up will display and say, what do you want the message to be? It will say, and you got to start talking quick, and it starts recording the message. And then you tap the M1 button again, and it will save that voice memory in M1. But what if I want to cancel the message? Well, you just tap record and it cancels and doesn't save the message. Let me try to show you that on the screen here. Okay, you should be back to seeing the K4 screen.
We're there.
Okay. Whoop. Okay, so you see the K4 screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in CW now, so I'm tapping REC, not recall, but REC, and it tells you tap M1 to 4. What do you want to program? Well, I'll press M1, and that's my CQ message. Show you a little trick here. I just tap record again to dismiss it, or I could have tapped the X. If I hold down the record button, that switches memory banks. See, it says message bank 2 selected. That's what this little, I guess I have to use this mouse so you see it. Or does this work? It doesn't work. Okay, so this little message 2 here is telling you that you've switched to memory bank 2. What do I have in memory bank 2? Well, I had to get record and M1. I got my RIDI messages in there. What's different about RIDI messages? Well, when you program an FSK RIDI message, you want to use the backslash as a new line. That's what this EOT symbol down here means. Let me see if I can point to that. EOT enters EOL enters a backslash symbol. You got to get out of shift. See, there's my backslash that shows up. That's end of line, which means send a new line. Edmunds W0YK, the RIDI expert, recommends sending a new line before your messages to make it show up easier on the print. And then you want to terminate the message with no diddles at the end, and that's what EOT, or end of transmission, does. So that's indicated on screen. When I tap EOT, it comes up as a vertical bar, and that means terminate the message immediately. Those will be ignored on CW, but I like to put the CQ at the end of a RIDI CQ message. I don't want that on CW. So that's why I've programmed the RIDI messages with that. So let me go ahead and X out of that and go back to bank 1. And now I'm going to switch to phone. So I'm not going to try to hit the mode key or any nonsense like that to switch modes. That's a silly way to switch modes. Why is it silly? Well, if I tap mode or hit then I go to LSB, now I got my VFOs in 2 different modes again. I don't want that. Unless I had to tap a whole bunch of stuff on the screen to change modes. Never do that. So let's go back to the way I was. I was in CW. If I want to change modes because I've set my quick memories up, I hit recall and M2. Now all my VFOs are changed to the same mode. My scope is set to the phone band edges for this band that I previously programmed. And now if I hit record and M1, it tells you on the screen, what do you want to start recording? Well, I'm going to hit M1 and I have my mic connected here and I don't want to save the message. So, but I'll pretend I hit M1. It's starting to record, but I don't want to record. So I tap the record button and I canceled my message. And go back into test mode here, turn on the audio, see if I messed up the message.
Secure contact, secure contact.
Nope, I didn't mess up the message. Sorry about the loud audio there. I have my monitor turned up too high. Oh, speaking of monitor, there's different monitor levels. You hold down the X-mitter button in the top of the three little knobs, and it tells you the monitor level. I had it set to 12. There's a separate monitor level for the line out jack, which I have set pretty loud right now. And it remembers 3 different monitor levels, one for phone, one for CW, one for digital modes. Okay, next question from WA0TXJ. What software are you using that allows screen capture, microphone audio, and K4 sound card audio? Well, I had to buy a piece of hardware. In this case, I'm using a Elgato HD60S Plus HDMI screen capture utility, and their built-in 4K capture utility, which that card happens to have an analog audio input. So I've connected line out from my K4 to the audio input of the capture card. So that mixes it together. There's also a USB 3.0 connection to the PC that I'm using. And that's how the audio of the radio and the video is getting mixed together and coming out the sound card of the PC, which you guys can hear when I unmute the radio.
Pass it to Charlie. Charlie, you can pass it back to Tim.
No, thanks, Charlie. All right.
So, Bob, we have a great question from Philip, Charlie Echo 4.
Oh,
Papa Sierra, can we use the AF record, AF play to send the recording on the air? Like you sound this way and then replay what you just heard from the station.
my understanding is that is in the works, not implemented yet. Aircraft is trying to figure out what it should look like, and they're having internal disagreements about what holding down AF record and holding down AF play should do. How fancy should they be? Should they have fast forward and rewind and instant replay buttons and all kinds of stuff? Or should it work just like the K3 and just simply show nothing but start recording and start playing back? And if you hit play while in transmit mode, it plays it back over the air.
So Bob, we have one more question, I think, from Steve. Will if this be the last one, W Mike 6 Papa, if you would, and then we'll close it out. And you've held almost everyone here. You peaked at 92 attendees, and we're in the mid 80s right now here at 75 minutes into the webinar.
Well, okay, I do see a couple of quick questions before that. Let me see if I can quickly get to them. N1PEB said, I see where calibration has been used when the power out is much less than dialed in. Can cal be used when the K4 status shows much higher power than what I have dialed in? Okay, the status display in the lower left corner here, let me put on a dummy load and turn out test mode. Switch to my dummy load. So if I hit the tune button, you'll see the power displayed in the lower left corner says 54 watts, but it's really 50 watts on the upper display. Then it toggles back to 50 and it toggles around for a while. You can ignore the power readings sort of in the lower left corner of the display. It's approximate, it's calculated a different way. I wouldn't worry about the status display area. Let's see. So Dave was asking me to go back to NK7I and V3DS questions. What was the V3DS question? Transverters. I have transverters external. Are the transverter settings in band data the same as the K3? Yes. It's complicated. I'll just quickly show you in the menu. Here are all the exverter settings, and that's for the first band, which would be, band 1 on the band data, and what the IF is and all of those settings. I haven't tested transverter, but by the way, when you see this symbol, this little keypad here, that means when you're changing the value, you can type numbers on the numeric keypad, the orange buttons of the K4, the symbol right here. Okay, a little too hard to go into gigahertz stuff. Are the transverter settings and band data the same as the K3? Yes, they are. If you use band 1, then you get the first BCD pin for band 1. I'm not sure where the NK7i question. Oh, where can we get that K4 capture utility? Okay, I think I answered that. Going down to memory playback. When is Gen available in the future? How will it be used? Yeah, when you tap the band button, there's this grayed out or blacked out Gen button down here. That's for general coverage. I assume and I hope that anything that is outside a ham band will be saved in the general coverage button. And that when you tap Gen a few times, it'll switch to your different general bands. Got the DVR stuff. Okay, so he's got that. If record and play. How do I toggle between message 1 and message 2? You hold down the REC button because it says bank in yellow below it. That switches memory bank 1 and memory bank 2. Thank you, Robert's IP. And then the transverter stuff. Okay, C4PS. What was his question? I just see a thank you.
You answered it already.
I did. Okay. Well, folks, I guess that'll wrap it up. Thank you again to Scott, K0MD, for recording this. And we'll try to get the YouTube video posted.